Buenas noches. Tonight we're going to give an introduction to the Flower of Life and to present it in a slightly different way than it is presented in the books. Also to talk about the relationship the Flower of Life has to sacred geometry and to a few other related subjects like crop circles and ETs and a lot of other things associated with it. These two guys on the screen, by the way, are some of the original ETs. They're not from here, really. They're not. They're from the star Sirius. And before that, they were from another galaxy further back over that. And then one day when they came to Sirius, they found out that Sirius and our sun were linked and moved together, and they came here. But they're not really from here. Okay, probably most of you have guessed by now this is the Flower of Life. Flower of Life, it's interesting how I found out about it. It took me 12 years of research, of doing research with sacred geometry. And ultimately, anyone who works in sacred geometry long enough comes back to the realization that this holds all sacred geometry. Period and the end, everything there is. Now, what is sacred geometry? Well, everything in the reality, everything. The stars, the planets, the sun, your body, everything in this world that we know of, just everything that exists, everything that's manifested through the sacred geometrical proportions. And there is no exceptions, absolutely zero. Everything you can think of, any words you can say, in fact, the very words themselves came out of sacred geometry. Even language comes out of sacred geometry. It's all of that. Even things that you would never guess, like emotions and feelings. It was Manfred Klein and Dan Winter in the United States who figured out that emotions were related to sacred geometry. They put people on EKG machines and put them up and found that there was a sine wave signature that a person was emitting when they were feeling a certain feeling. And every feeling has a unique sine wave signature. And those sine wave signatures are then converted into three-dimensional forms that you can hold in your hands. And all of those forms are based on sacred geometry. So there's a thing, a three-dimensional polyhedron you can hold in your hand that represents love, and another one that represents the opposite, say hate. And so this is clear with the entire world that's studying this right now, and I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people now studying it. But there was a time, even though this is new to the world right now, it's new because it hasn't been remembered in a long time. There were only a few people. Rudolf Steiner started to remember this, and people like Buckminster Fuller started to understand it, though he only understood it to a certain level. He didn't really fully get it. And then people like Robert Lawler really got it, and Keith Kirchlow definitely got it. And these people started talking about it, but most of the world didn't have any idea what they were talking about. But long ago, 6,000 years ago, all the way up until roughly right after the Greek Empire in ancient Greece, this was known everywhere, all over the world. The Flower of Life was like Elvis Presley. I mean, everybody knew it. And I'm just going to show you a few places just so you can understand that this truly was everywhere, all over the world. There's different things in here. This is called the Flower of Life. There are 19 circles, if you counted them, in here, and they're surrounded by two circles. Those outer two circles are not just for looks. They're extremely important in all of this. And inside the middle of here, there's this middle one where you see these 6 petals. And then outside of that, there are 6 more that move around that, if you could see that. It's hard to see, but you'll see it in a minute. That's called the seed of life. Now, these are not words I'm making up. These are the actual words that were used in ancient times to describe this. I think they called it the flower of life because it looks like a flower and because it is the laws and proportions for everything alive and even not alive. Everything that's manifested. So the first thing I'm going to do is just show you places around the world where this was found in ancient times. The Essenes, 500 BC. This was their first city that they built after they came out of Egypt. And in the very center of this complex, these are ancient ruins here. This is at Masada. They had a church. And in the center of that church, it was their most important building. And though it's really hard to see in the slide, and if you pull it up close and look at it, you can see it. But right here, this is the floor. And it's not even focused. You got to do, okay, trust me. This was a big square at one time, and squares that came in right here, which you could see the outer ends of it that was still left on the floor, was the flower of life. It's very clear if you're there. I've had people that were there and took really good photographs of it. And so the flower of life was actually a central motif in the Essene community. This comes right out of the center, like I was showing you before. And you'll see both of these, both the center one and that complex right there in ancient times. This is a mosaic floor out of Greece. It's on the island of Crete. And right there, you can see the central motif out of the flower of life. However, the flower of life is found all over Greece. I don't have all the slides here to show it. In fact, they found something that I just got recently, which is really incredible. It's a monastery in Greece. It's very old. It has a big white wall all the way around it, and it's all white buildings, white inside, white outside. And on the outside of this wall, about every 100 feet, is the flower of life, all the way around it. And in every single building, in every single room inside, and even windows in stained glass, is the flower of life. It's interesting. The monk who ran that was named Melchizedek. This is off of a very, very old chest that came out of Turkey. And here you can see the flower of life motif with the 6 circles moving around it. We found it in 18 places around the Mediterranean, in countries practically all the way around it. So it was really well known there. This is called the seed of life, which is out of the middle of the flower of life. And this one here is an interesting one. This is a business that we started a long time ago, making organic seeds from 1988. But this pattern in the back is the seed of life. And it was taken from a wooden box that came from Tibet. And the box contained an instrument for planting seeds. But it came from Tibet. This comes out of Ireland. And it's a doorknob. The doorknob went right through there. And this is more complex with all this Gaelic designs and things. But there's a star here and a star coming back. And there's the 13 patterns. And if you've studied the flower of life, you'll know that this is all connected to the flower of life. We found it in England and France. And we found it in Israel and several places. We found it in Egypt. In fact, the first place we ever found it was in Egypt. It was found on a 6,000-year-old wall in Egypt, though I believe that even though the wall was 6,000 years old, that the flower of life was not done 6,000 years before, but was done by the Coptics in 500 BC, about the same time as the Essenes. The Coptics and the Essenes were working together. And here's another man we're all familiar with, Leonardo da Vinci, out of the Italian Renaissance. He definitely knew about the flower of life, though the people who have studied Leonardo da Vinci and have spent their lifetime trying to understand his work do not understand this. In fact, it was found in a book of things that they threw away because they didn't know what it was. But this is Leonardo's drawing, showing where he's got the flower of life pattern expanded inside of here. And Leonardo spent a great deal of time looking at all the little angles that were inside the flower of life, making each possible way and relationship that he could find out of this. And he made pages of these, studying the flower of life in great detail. But of course, he was a Mason. And the Masons were intimately connected with the flower of life. And that proof is beautiful, though I can't show it to you here. The Masons, whenever they built a temple, in fact, all the churches that were built in Europe in the earlier days, when they removed the cornerstone out of it, on the back were the signatures of all the Masons and the architects who built that. They were very strange-looking things. They were like a circle with a line going across, or a line like this, and then a line coming over like they were. You just look at them and you go, what's that? But we've looked at several hundred of them, every one that we could find, the names of all these Masons, and every single one of them mapped perfectly over the flower of life. So obviously, they also knew about it. And so do all the zodiacal signs that are in astrology, mapped perfectly over the flower of life. And so do the runes. You know, the runes, the ones that you throw to get the thing, where they came from. Anybody know? Is Sweden or Norway or somewhere up in there? All the runes map perfectly over the flower of life. So they were using that as their key also. And so I could go on for a long time, actually. I'll go a few more. We mentioned Tibet, but a place where this symbol was extremely popular, and is even till today, was China. It's all over China, even today. No matter where you go in there, you'll find it constantly. You'll find it on their screens. You'll find it these folding screens. And one of the most prominent places is in the Forbidden Palace. And in the Forbidden Palace, in the emperor's throne, there are two lions, these snarling lions on either side of his throne. And the lion on the left side of him, if he was facing out, was a female, and it just has a kitten, a lion kitten under her paw. But the lion on the right side, the male, has under his right paw a three-dimensional flower of life. It's a sphere, but it's three-dimensional. And it says right in front of there, because this was what the emperor said, was that this lion was protecting all the knowledge of the universe. And then, if you go into China, you'll find the flower of life everywhere. It's all over the Shinto temples. And again, you'll see the lions protecting not only the flower of life, but the seed of life, and even the central core of life will be displayed. And the first time I ever gave one of these workshops in Japan, I had 3 Shinto priests who knew that I was going to talk about this, sat in my class, and they were very quiet. They didn't say hardly anything. And then every once in a while, I would say something, I'd be explaining this stuff like that, and they'd go, they'd visibly be shocked. And finally, they warmed up a little bit, and we got to talk. And they said they had been the Shinto priests. They had been priests all their life, but they didn't know what it meant because they had lost the true meaning that was behind all of this. One of them, when I got to something that's called Metatron's cube, which you're going to see in just a minute, he just about fell out of his chair. Because Metatron's cube, once a year, they put on this beautiful silk white robe, and over the breastplate is this complex pattern called Metatron's cube, which we have up there. None of them had any idea what it was. They didn't even know. All they knew was that from ancient times, they were to wear that thing and walk down the street once a year and do this particular ceremony, but they had no idea what this thing was. And this is what we found everywhere, all over the world. There was a time once when the whole world knew about this, but at this point, almost everybody's forgotten what it is. Even the Freemasons, by the way. I've had very high levels of the Freemasons go through here, and when they study very carefully what's going on, they were not even told about a lot of the things that we're talking about, because more than likely, even their leaders have forgotten. So I don't remember what the next slide is. Aha, I do remember now. This pattern could be infinite. I mean, you could keep right on going and going up across the whole wall. You could keep going forever. But all over the world, they stopped at 19 circles and put these 2 circles around it. Why did they do that? Obviously, it had. Why didn't they go out further, or why did they go only in the middle? Why was it always 19 circles? Well, that became clear as I was studying this and we were decoding what this was. The reason is because, and I can't explain this, you're going to have to read into the books in order to understand this, but spirit, when spirit comes out of the void, out of nothing, and begins to do a vortex rotational motion in a certain way, it creates the flower of life. And there's a vortex pattern that it makes that begins to make this pattern. And if you were to complete the circles that are only partially drawn, like here's one here that's only partially drawn, here's another one that's only partially, here's a little piece of one and here's like 3 pieces of ones that are only partially drawn, you're going to find lots of them in here. They're not completed circles like this one. If you complete all the circles around the outer edge, just do that. And when you do, this yellow is where the 2 lines of the flower of life was. And these blue ones are the completed flower of life pieces that were missing. You do that. And then the innermost points, which we talk about in the book, are here, there, 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 and there. That's where the next rotational vortex is. And so when you do it, you make the next vortex, you get another sphere at each one of those places, and they link through and form this pattern of 13 circles. In other words, they didn't want you to see this pattern of 13 circles because it was too sacred. In the ancient world, that pattern could not be displayed publicly. They would kill you if you did it. I would be killed for showing you this if this was 3,000 years ago, because it was too sacred for just the average person to know. So if you extract it out, you get this, leaving out all the rest of it, and you have these 13 circles. This was called the fruit of life to the ancients. And it has 13 systems of knowledge in there. And the reason it's called the fruit, because it fills in all the details of the reality, of this reality we live in. All the tiny details are all established and created through this one single pattern. Now, there are a lot of other things that happen coming to this pattern that we haven't talked about. And that you can pick up in the books if you read them. But I just want to talk about this one pattern for a little bit. In sacred geometry, a straight line is considered male. There's total consensus in the world on this from all people that I'm aware of that are studying in sacred geometry. But any curved line that's not straight, no matter what the curve is, it's female. I mean, you can just look at male and female bodies and see that the male body is straighter and the female body is curvier. But at any rate, in sacred geometry, this has been established. And so this image that you're looking up here is all female. There's no male in here. But there's 13 ways that the male can be superimposed over the female. 13 different, entirely unique ways, and each one produces this vast system of knowledge that just keeps expanding out further and further. I mean, you could spend half your life studying each one of these systems of knowledge and never come to the end because it's so complex and there's so much involved in it. In the Flower of Life books, I only show 4 of the systems because it's just too much to go on to all of it. But by looking at 4 systems, you can definitely understand. Tonight, we're only going to look at 1 because we'd be here the rest of the night just doing this. The simplest, most obvious way to link male lines, straight lines over the female curved lines is simply by connecting all the centers together, the centers of these circles. In other words, to connect this center to that center, you draw a straight line through there. But this center here would be another line. This center would run that way, up that way. This one would run from here over to there. And you just do all possibilities of every possible way that straight lines can move over there, and you get this. And if you could focus it a little bit. And this is called Metatron's cube. This is what was on the Shinto's priest, on the breastplate of the Shinto's priest, where the guy just practically fell out of his chair when I showed him this, because to them it was one of the most sacred images in existence. And so you could just say, well, so what? What is it? It's just a bunch of lines, you know. I mean, it doesn't mean anything, does it? Well, it really does. In just regular geometry, not even sacred geometry, but in regular geometry, there are a lot of polyhedron, three-dimensional shapes that connect back into themselves. And there are 5 of them that are unique. They're completely unique. There are no others like them. And they're called the Platonic solids. It was after Plato in the Grecian times when he was talking about the Platonic solids, though he was not the first. And in fact, they have traced the Platonic solids back in humanity scientifically 20,000 years BC, where they have found people alive somewhere that have carved three-dimensional, the 5 Platonic solids three-dimensionally that have been dated back to 20,000 BC. So it's been around a while, at least. But inside of here are those 5 Platonic solids. You can't see them. It takes time. You've got to figure it out. But what you do is you keep certain lines and you erase other lines to get to them. For example, if I was to only keep these lines and erase all the other ones, and these little white lines are the ones that are on the back side of this three-dimensional form, and the heavy ones are on the front side of it, you get something called the icosahedron, which is this. And that, of course, goes back around. It's 20 triangles linked. What makes these this one, the icosahedron, and the other 4 unique is that they have these characteristics. All the edges of this shape are all the same, all over. They're all the same length. All of the faces are the same. They're equilateral triangles. All of the angles inside are exactly the same. And this shape will fit inside of a perfect sphere where all the extending points out of here will lie on the surface of the sphere. Believe me, they have taken computers and had these computers run day and night for months and months and months trying to find a 6th Platonic solid. No one's ever found one. These are all 5 of them. There's the tetrahedron, a cube, octahedron, the icosahedron we just looked at, the pentagonal dodecahedron, and the sphere, of course, which is not one of the Platonic solids, but it's where they came from. The sphere is what contains them, because all the points of these things are sitting on the surface of this sphere invisibly. So the female, which is pure female, gave birth to these 5 different male forms. They're male because they have nothing but straight lines in them. Understand? So what are the Platonic solids? Well, any engineer that goes to college has to learn about these, because they are the forms that determine structure. Like if you're building a bridge or anything else like that, you have to know stress and everything else like that. And they're all based back into these 5 shapes. Structure is the primary key of them. For example, all crystals known to man, which there are a little slightly more than 100,000 of them, like quartz or emerald or different kinds of crystals, all have the atoms inside of them arranged in different geometrical patterns that are all functions of these 5 Platonic solids, period, in the end. No matter what the crystal is, it came from one of those 5 shapes. And viruses, all viruses are polyhedron. They're just shapes like this. That's all they are. And all viruses in existence came from one of these 5 shapes, which, by the way, is the secret on how you can cure all viruses. We've already done it. They just won't let us talk about it. Somebody will do it. Once you figure that out, it's not too far behind. You can eliminate any virus by knowing how this works. Everything in our reality, in fact, if you want to just jump to the very end period of the whole bottom line of the whole thing, the periodic table of elements, all the elements of everything from hydrogen to helium to etc., all the way through, and silver, gold, all the way that the electrons are arranged around the atoms and the way that they are configured inside of there are all a function of one form, which is the cube. That's been established scientifically. Now, they didn't understand it when they did it. All they knew was that that one form determines everything. And so, in other words, the very fabric of all, which is just atomic levels of everything inside of our reality, from every level conceivable on an atomic level, is a function of one of the Platonic solids. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper into this, and the more you study it, the more outrageous it is, the more you begin to realize that everything is a function. But this is just the structural pattern. They're important to understand in many different disciplines, but they're also important to understand if you're trying to figure out why you're here and what this reality is all about. And yet, this is only one system out of 13. So there are 12 more extraordinary systems of knowledge, not based on this, that go into other levels of our existence. There's even a system of knowledge that determines consciousness itself. When consciousness, the very levels of where consciousness is harmonic and is able to interpret the one reality that exists. And there is only one reality. There just is whatever there is. But there are many, many, many ways, at least 100,000 ways that Melchizedeks have determined that you can interpret that one reality. And all of those are based on sacred geometry. You can actually measure. If you went to a planet that you never saw before and you got some weird-looking ET, and you could just lay them out and measure them and figure them all out and find out which one of these forms he came out of, his structural form or anything like that. And you can do certain things to determine, and you can find out exactly, without ever even talking to them, how they're interpreting the one reality, how they're seeing it. The ancients gave names to these five things, these five different forms. The tetrahedron was called fire. The cube was called earth. The octahedron was called air. The icosahedron was water. And the pentagonal dodecahedron was ether or prana, life force energy or chi. And these five, the combination of these five forms created a discipline called alchemy, where the understanding of the blending of fire, earth, air, water, and ether were what created everything and were the basis of creation itself. Another basis of creation itself is the DNA molecule. The DNA molecule is what contains the knowledge of, say, how your body is created. However, I believe that it's a little bit further along than that it actually contains the knowledge of how to create the entire universe. But it has at least that much of how to create your body. But all the physical forms, biological forms on the earth are all based on DNA. And that, the DNA molecule, is based only on these two forms. Now, there is a way, the original way was that they saw it as a cube that was rotating at 72-degree angles. That was one of the first ways. And then later, other scientists discovered that, okay, you could see it that way, but a better way is seeing it with these two forms here. These two forms in sacred geometry are what are called duals of each other. They're duals because if you take the centers of the pentagonal dodecahedron and drew lines between them, you get this form. And the other way around, if you take the centers of this one, you get this form. They're duals of each other. In the same way that these two are duals of each other. If you connect the centers of a cube, you get an octahedron. And this one defines the parameters of this one. So these two are duals of each other, and these are duals of each other. This one here is found also in the cube, and in a way that I'll explain in just a moment. So this is your DNA, and what it is the DNA is just the icosahedron creates the dodeca, and then the dodeca creates the icosa again, which creates the dodeca again, which creates the opposite again. And as it does, it begins to turn, and it makes the two strands of the DNA. And a little detail that's interesting that they've discovered just recently in the last couple of years. You know, in all your biological books, you usually see a DNA molecule sort of coming from nowhere and going nowhere. They just sort of start and twist and stops and like it goes on forever. That's not true. They've thrown that out in the last couple of years, and it's been proven by other universities, though it's not in the textbooks yet, unless you got a brand new textbook. But the DNA molecule wraps back on itself and completes itself, and you can see how it does it because one end is this and one end is that, and they lock like a little lock, and they form a circle. And what it really is what's called a torus or a toroidal field. It's like a donut. It wraps back around. And the torus or the donut shape is the most unique shape in existence. It can do things that no other shape in existence can do, and it's the first shape that comes out of the flower of life. I didn't talk about all of that, but it is the most primal shape in existence. And so that's what these two things do, is create that. This is very interesting because this is water, and that's prana. Water and life force energy is the pattern that creates the DNA. You can think about that for a few weeks. Just alone, at least I did. Okay. Now, with that basic understanding, we're going to come back here again to Metatron's cube, where we started, where all those different shapes were. And there's one particular shape in here, which is the tetrahedron. But interesting is that when you get the tetrahedron, you don't get the tetrahedron by itself. You get two of them, and they're interlocked in this way. It's called a star tetrahedron. So if you were to take this line And keep that one. And keep this one. Keep the ones that go into the middle. Keep this one here that forms another triangle there. Keep another one that comes down, forms another triangle there. There's a series of them. You'll see them in a minute. Erase all the rest of them. You get this. And at first glance, it doesn't look like anything. Definitely doesn't look like anything three-dimensional. But if you were to shade it in a certain kind of way, it becomes clear. And what that is called a star tetrahedron. And it's also inscribed inside of a sphere. This will fit perfectly inside of a sphere. Star tetrahedron inside of a sphere is one of the most primal shapes and important shapes that I could possibly give to you up here. It's more important even than the DNA. And I'm just going to follow down that one road. I mean, and every one of these shapes relative to sacred geometry, you could spend at least a week just going on and on and on about all the different ways that it goes in the reality on every single one of them. And we don't have that kind of time, so I'm only going to go just a little bit here. But now this blue one goes back out the other way, forming a three-dimensional pyramid going out the other way, out the back end. Okay, what is this? What does it mean? Well, one of the ways that the star tetrahedron inscribed in the sphere is important to life, one of them that we're going to talk about right now, is that it is the basis of all biological life forms. All of them, without exception. I don't care if you're on this planet or if you're in anywhere else, and you're some ET and you look really strange and weird, you still are going to go through the same things I'm about to talk about. Because there's only one God, there's only one sacred geometry, there's only one reality, and it's all the same no matter where you go. That's the purpose of why we're doing this, because we are interpreting the one reality from an instrument that is polarized, our brain. It's got a left and a right side, and it sees everything as either good or bad. And once the brain sees absolutely for certain that there is only one function, one thought moving through everything, it does this funny thing to the what's called corpus callosum that links the left and the right side together. It begins to open up, and the two sides begin to balance, and enlightenment begins. Enlightenment means moving out of duality consciousness into unity consciousness, where you begin to see the unity of all life everywhere. You begin to realize that every one of us are linked in ways that the world right now has forgotten. And so, let's look at conception. Conception begins with a round sphere, the first one at the top of that pattern we showed before, the pure female energy of the round sphere called an ovum. We all began as a sphere, each one of us. Probably don't remember, but we did. And then through something called mitosis, we divided from one sphere into two. And this is an electron microscope photograph of the real thing, where we divided from 1 to 2. Then when we go from 2 to 4, using the binary sequence, it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, which is one of the sequences of life. There's another really important one called the Fibonacci sequence, which we'll just slightly touch on later. It goes from 2 to 4, but when it goes to 4, it isn't just any 4, any old way. It isn't just 4 cells kind of floating around in a fluid. This is an actual photograph. Forget this one because it's beginning to go to the next level. But there's one here, one here, one here, and back here you can see the fourth one, same size. And if you drew a line between there and there and there and then over to this one in the back, you get a tetrahedron. And it looks like this. The 4 cells are like that, and they're aligned down the north and south axis. There is a north pole and a south pole to the mitosis division of the ovum. And it forms this pattern right here. But then when it goes from 4 to 8, it forms another star tetrahedron facing this way. Like this. There's one linked in coming down here and one linked in going up there. And it's a star tetrahedron inscribed in a sphere. One of the most important images that you can ever imagine. And yet we're only beginning to touch on what this really means. I mean, it's not just all life that we know. It's even more than that, as you'll see in a little bit. And so, and then to describe the rest of it very quickly, it moves from there. Well, it actually, this is also a cube. You'd never know it by looking at that. But if you were to connect the centers of all those together, the star tetrahedron forms a perfect cube also. So the star tetrahedron fits inside another platonic solid called a cube, and it's connected to it. It's the diagonal lines across the cube that form the relationships of this pattern. And just to give you an idea of how intelligent God is, how amazing the Creator is. This here, go back to this other one. Even though this is a star tetrahedron, you're now looking at it from the top, looking down. There is this place where it becomes a cube, and if you were to look at just these 4 here, there's these other 4 behind it. So if you were looking from over here at this face, you'd only see these 4, and you wouldn't see the 4 behind it because they would be slightly smaller. And you would get this image here. You'd see these 4 spheres right here, and you couldn't see the 4 behind it because they're slightly smaller. And it fits inside of, like we already showed, a perfect cube right here. And that's a cube if it was going back through there like that. And this circle here will exactly enclose those 8 cells. And this other one outside of it is the thickness of the membrane, which is called the zona pellucida of the mitosis at 8 cell division. That is actually determined by the flower of life, where those 2 lines that are on the outside has actually determined the thickness of the membrane. Even the thickness of the membrane is not an accident. It's not just a random thing. It's all based on sacred geometry. And here you can see the star tetrahedron also inscribed in the sphere at the same time. And we'll explain that in just a moment. And so here Leonardo is actually showing how this relationship of the corners, the width of the circles, and all the relationship of this male form that's in here. But if you think about this for a moment, it's because here is the 8 cell division, and it is in the exact proportions of the real thing. But it also, so that's at one time you were in that shape of 8 cells with this cube around it and the sphere that contained it. And even at the moment of 8 cells, it contains the exact proportions of the adult human body. It's amazing, really. So we just touched upon how sacred geometry works on microscopic levels. What about the macrocosm instead of the microcosm? Let's look up into the macrocosm of the stars and the planets and these kinds of things. There was a man named Kepler. I can't remember when he lived. I think it was 200 or 300 years ago. But I don't actually remember when he lived. But you can look it up. And he believed that the positioning of the orbits of our planets in our solar system were not at random, that from everything that he had studied, that they had to be directly connected to the 5 Platonic solids. And he searched for it, and he made all these models, and he went through a lot of his life trying to find this, and it wasn't accurate and it didn't work. The reason it didn't work is because his information was inaccurate. They didn't know where the planets were in orbits. And so he was working with inaccurate information. But there are people now, today, who have put this into computers, where they have taken all of sacred geometry that's known and all what NASA knows about where the planets are located relative to the sun. And they know the precise maximum, minimum, and mean orbit of each one of these different planets very precisely. And that was all thrown into the equation. And then a button was pushed to find out what the computer could find, and what it found proved conclusively that it's true. That all of the planets, their orbits, their relationships to each other, you can pick Mars to Earth or Mars to Jupiter, and those relationships are not only are all of them in relationship to the sun, but to each other they are in relationship. And even the sizes of them are not at random. Planets can only be at certain sizes. Sounds outrageous? Well, let's look at this next slide. Oh, not that next slide. I forgot about that one. And I forgot about that one. This one. Again, we have Leonardo's drawing. And first thing I want you to notice is that if you take this body that he's got drawing here with his arms out like that and his legs straight down, so you're like this, there's a perfect square that fits around your body. In other words, you are the height. Now, if you take an individual, that won't be true. There'll be variances. But science has taken large groups. You have to have a minimum of 100 people, and they've measured them really carefully. And they found that the height of the body and the width of the body, there's a difference of only 1/10,000th of an inch. You can barely see 1/10,000th of an inch. And that 1/10,000th of an inch isn't a mistake. It's related to the Fibonacci sequence, which is another subject. I can't tell you about that, but it is not a mistake. It's part of the equation. And so basically, you are the same height as you are with your arms out. And a cube passes, or a square or a cube passes around there, and the center of that square is precisely at the perineum, the body. Then, if you put your arms like this and your legs out like that, there's a circle that will pass perfectly around there, or a sphere. And it's this one here, which isn't drawn very well. It kind of disappears there. It comes right underneath the feet and goes on around. Comes up here. Comes on down around and comes back down under the feet. And the center of that one is exactly at the navel. And so you have this circle and this square relationship around the human body. Every biological form has different, it chooses different geometrical patterns to structure itself through. And so you have to figure out which one it is. But the human body is the square or the circle. And if you then move this circle that's at the navel, and you just bring the whole thing down to the same center as the square, then you get the circle here. And you see how it cuts that corner, just that little bit right there, and it cuts it right there, and right there, and right there. And interesting enough, if you were to measure this square that fits around the body there, the perimeter of that, and then you were to measure the circumference of that, if you have a perfectly formed body, they're the same. And it's been determined, and if you study, you'll see, that when the square and the circle, and in China they talk about squaring the circle and circling the square, when the perimeter of the square and the circumference of the circle are the same, that's when human consciousness focuses in, and that's when life begins. And now one step further, if you were this square that goes around the human body, if you put a circle inside of that square, which is this blue in here, and then up here at this circle, you were to come down here and draw a circle around with this to here being your measuring stick, you get this little orange one up here. Guess what? This, relative to this, is exactly mathematically proportionate to the size of the Earth to the size of the Moon. This was determined at least 2,000 years ago. What does it mean? I mean, what does it mean that in the proportions of the human body, the very planet that we're standing on and the moon that circles around it is in there, in the very proportions, predetermined? Is it just a coincidence or an accident? I don't think so. In fact, we know for sure because of what I'm about to show you in a minute. I just mentioned about Kepler and him extending this idea out to, because he knew about this idea also. He knew that the Earth and the Moon were in proportion. That's why he believed that everything had to be in the solar system. I believe it's absolutely everything to the most distant galaxy and the sizes of every galaxy, etc., and everything. But we can prove it in our own solar system. There's a book written. The guy took all of the relationships that the computer found and put them into a book. It's about, an inch thick, and it's a couple hundred different possible relationships that you could ever think of. We're going to show one Chiron and I think Mars. I can't remember. I'll have to wait till I get on there. I just chose 3 of them. But there are about 200 of them that they've picked out, and it's called the Book of Coincidences. And so we were going to, I had got it all together, I got the money together and everything else, and we were going to make a movie about this, a documentary, to show how this was, because this man figured it out. He came over here and then realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to be famous. And he didn't want to be famous, and so he wouldn't allow the movie, and he won't allow anyone to even use his name. So I can't tell you who did it. So I guess it doesn't really matter. But there's only 1,000 copies of the book in the world. And this is one of the pages. I got this one too. I just did this last night for the first time. One more thing I got to show you first. If you take the edge of the Earth over to the edge of the Earth, the diameter of the Earth, and from the center of the Earth to the center of the Moon, and then you draw these lines right here, this angle right here is 51 degrees, 51 minutes, 24 seconds, and which happens to be the exact angle and precise proportions of the Great Pyramid. This is interesting because Hermes, who most people who've studied this believe was also a man named Thoth, in the Emerald Tablets that was written by Hermes, he states how the Great Pyramid was built from the proportions of the Earth. Well, whether or not Thoth or Hermes actually built the Great Pyramid, we can't prove that, but we can prove that what he has just said inside that statement is fact. That angle right there is 51 degrees, 51 minutes, 24 seconds. And so this is a precise arrangement of what we just talked about. Now I can go to this other thing that we're going to talk about. This is one of his pages out of this book, and it's the relationship between Chiron and Pluto. And in other words, this is the orbit of these two bodies. This is Pluto here. And these are a very simple relationship. All you have to do is and the sun is in the center. All you have to do is draw a 5-sided pentagon, and then you draw one down facing the other way, then you draw one up, and then you draw one down, and you draw one up, and on the inner one you draw a circle, and on the outer one you draw a circle, And those lines go up and form the exact relationship between the Sun, Chiron, and Pluto. It's 99.8% perfect. Considering we have a moving system through space and time, everything's moving through there. They're not only going around this way, but the whole thing is moving like this, as a solid body, moving around the galaxy, connected to the star Sirius. It's pretty amazing that a simple drawing like this could do that. But when you start looking at first 1, then 2, then 50, then 100, then 150, these relationships, and they're all that way. Anything you can think of, any relationship between, say, Earth and Mars and Earth and Venus or Earth and Mercury or anything like that, it's already been worked out. They're all there, every single doggone one of them. This is another simple one here. This is the relationship of Earth to Mars. Earth and Mars. Really simple. Just draw a 5-pointed star down and 1 pointed up. The inner circle goes up and is the orbit of Mars relative to the Sun. The outer one, of the Earth. And the outer one becomes the orbit of Mars. And it also is 99.8% perfect. They're all 99.8 or 99.9. I think there's one that's 99.7. The fact that could happen is not a coincidence, even though it's called a book of coincidences. Everything. And so, what this is saying is that everything's predetermined. And that's what sacred geometry shows clearly. But there's only certain places where things can happen. And you can see where they're going to be by the geometrical proportions of things. It's possible for the human mind to understand the entire universe on a physical level. You could grok the whole thing with just a little bit of study. And that does this funny thing to the left and the right side of your brain. It's the beginning. It's not the end. It's not what it's all about. It's only the first step. Now, this one's a really interesting one. I chose it for this reason. All over the ancient world, they built temples to try to determine basically the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, the maximum winter dropping of the sun to the maximum. You have the summer. What is that? It's the winter, spring. The difference in those. It's winter, spring, I think. But it's when the sun swings one way down and swings down the other way, and you try to determine those points. You need to know the equinoxes so you can do your planting and all these things like this. They could have simply drawn this drawing in the sand, one pentagon down, one up, one down, one up. It's just 4 of them. One was 5, one was 2, and one was 4. And drawn the circles inside there like that, drew them down into a ring, and if you could put them over a sphere, those rings, as they fit over a sphere, precisely locate the Tropic of Cancer, the equator, and the Tropic of Capricorn. That is 100% perfect. It is absolutely right on. Now, this whole thing about a star tetrahedron inscribed in a sphere has come about it in a slightly different way. We were showing how it is the basis of all biological life forms, and how in the microcosm, and how the relationships of the 5 platonic solids are out in space around us. This is a crop circle, and it was one that Richard Hoagland was analyzing. I became, at one point, Richard Hoagland was the person who found, using NASA photographs, the face on Mars. And that face on Mars